Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Charvak podcast patrons book discussion. As always, this is Kushal Behra, and I would like to start by thanking all of you for the support on Patreon. And before we get into the discussion, just a brief idea about why I'm doing this and what is the intent behind starting this Patreon page. As and when the podcast kept on growing, I just realized I get bombarded with messages. I can't answer any of them. What happens is, let's say if I get on an average 50 to 70 messages in a day, Twitter, Facebook, different platforms, you can filter out 30 abuses amongst them, but still I have 40 messages. I can't answer all of them. It's just physically impossible for me. So I just created this paywall to do what I thought was the most sensible thing to do. It was via the paywall. What will happen is people who really want to have a discussion, people who want to learn, or maybe want to teach me a few things, they'll make that extra effort. Because what I do is when I pay someone, it's not like I'm not contributing on Patreon. I'm actually supporting 7 or 8 podcasts on Patreon. When I support them, I put an effort. I think before I ask them a question. I think before I say things. So what I decided was the first thing I'm going to do is, because I'm very passionate about the subject of Aryan invasion, Aryan migration, and out of India. I've read a bit about it. I don't claim to be an expert, but I'm low more than the average Joe. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go through books. I'm going to go through the books of the authors that I've read, maybe papers that I've read, and then we can discuss it with people who are on Patreon. So today, I'm very happy. We have 3 patrons with me. So first of all, before we get into the discussion, I want to thank all of you who are on today and who are not on today for your support. Really, from the bottom of my heart. Actually, I'm surprised कि कोई मुझे support भी करेगा. I thought I was just an idiot doing things on the internet. So on that note, this means a lot to me, believe me. And I want to repeat, the money doesn't matter. The amount doesn't matter. The gesture matters. Because in my personal life, I'm an entrepreneur. I have my full-time business. And in spite of all of that, I'm trying to build this platform via which my whole aim here is that through this platform, I'll be able to give you guys a place where you can get real content. Yes, there'll be things on the main podcast where I'll be chatting. But what happens is most of the times on my podcast, I'm not speaking. I ask a question and I just shut up and let the other person speak. That's pretty much the podcast. Yeah, I do a monologue once a month. That too, it depends. If I feel like doing it, I'll do it. What I want to do is that my time, my reading, my input should now go more into Patreon. I'm going to leave my input, my understanding, my reading, my content, or my brain for Patreon. I'm going to try and share whatever I know, whatever I do, whatever I feel over here, because this is what I'm comfortable with. See, I'm a guy who reads. I like to read. I read 3 hours or 2 hours daily. That's like a ritual. I have to read. So I'll be reading, and whatever I read, if I find something interesting, I'll put it on Patreon. This is what I feel, and we'll discuss that. So now we're going to start with the Aryan invasion theory. So why did I start with Shrikant Talagiri? So let me give you guys a brief idea about why I think if you want to understand Aryan invasion, Aryan migration, and out of India, you have to read Talagiri. Because I'm not going to say who you're supposed to read on the left. There are many you can actually read on the left. There is Michael Witzel. There is David Anthony, I think it was David Anthony whose book was The Horse, the Wheel, whatever. It's a very long name. It's a very good book, by the way, David Anthony's book. You should read it. Tony Joseph, yes, it's going to trigger a lot of you on Patreon, but Tony Joseph's book is actually a must read. It's a good book. You should read it. It's an interesting book. It's a very interesting book. So I've given you 3 names that you should read. On a podcast space, if you want to follow a good podcast to understand Aryan invasion, it's actually Brown Pundits. If you go to Brown Pundits, Rajiv Khan has done a good job in summarizing the work, which is pro Aryan invasion, Aryan migration. In fact, he did a recent podcast with that guy Vagish Narasimhan, who was also one of the co-authors in the paper, which was basically written by Shinde, Rai, and Reich. So you should actually listen to them. So there in our culture, we call it Purva Paksh and Uttar Paksh, right? So if we want to give an Uttar Paksh, we have to first do a proper Purva Paksh. So unfortunately, what happens is nobody has done a Purva Paksh properly on the Aryan invasion migration theory, even on the non-left. Nobody actually understands what they are rejecting. So let us first start with the basic. What is the Aryan invasion and what is the Aryan migration theory? So to put it in one short stanza, it is a claim. It Let us not go into the 200-year-old claim where we were barbarians and they were the civilized ones. Even they have rejected that theory after they found the Indus Valley civilization. So let us not use a straw man to say that is what they stand for, because they don't stand for that. What they stand for is, their claim is, there was a migration of the people from the steppes or the steppe. I don't know the pronunciation. It's not my language. I could care less. There were these people who came around this 2000 to 1500 BC time frame, around this 15. I mean, it goes right up to 1200 BC because they have that Swat Valley sample or something they claim around 1200 BC too. So what they say is, these are the people that came into a certain time, and this is when you had the steppe people DNA and the intermixing of the steppe people. Now this is where the what I call the leap of faith happens. What is the leap of faith? The leap of faith is that these people who came in, nobody can deny these people coming in. That's just absolutely true. Anybody who denies that is a duffer. What is problematic is, they say these people came in and these are the people who got the languages with them. Now you ask them, why? How did they bring the language? Then they will say they have this weird Slavic, Balto-Slavic languages ka argument. Now, what we'll do is we'll use that argument later on when we discuss the book, because it's not in today's first chapter. But their whole idea is, they used the spread of the Balto-Slavic languages and then they use the same logic and bring it here. This is the linguistic argument they give. The second, and which is the most main argument, which is very funny because they call it a migration, but the way they explain the genetic argument, it actually is an invasion. If you go by their explanation. So what is the explanation? Where do you find the R1A1 haplogroup? In the Indian side, you find it on the paternal side. You don't find it on the maternal side. Iska matlab kya? What does this mean? This means that when you check the DNA sample, when you analyze the DNA, it is only from the male that this DNA has come. It did not come from the female. That means they killed all the men over here. They mated with the women over here. And so if they killed all the men over here, they mated with the women over here, why is it a migration? It is an invasion then. But they never call it an invasion. They always call it a migration. I have no clue. At least one thing, I'll give credit to Razib Khan here. He stands tall and says it was an invasion. And he never budges from that. He called it an integration now in a new article, which shocked me because I don't know what Razib was talking about there. But Razib has always been consistent. He says it is an invasion. The paternal side DNA shows that. Now, the rebuttal to that is going to come. I mean, if you guys have seen the podcast with Neeraj Rai, let's just wait for the R1A1 haplogroup discussion where they will check the diversity, and it might as well be proven that R1A1 itself is native to India. So basically, the whole argument will go into the dustbin of history. So now we've cleared the basics. Now let's get into the first book. So we're starting with this book, Rigveda, a historical analysis, with Shrikant Talagiri. Now I'll explain. This is not his first book actually. This is Shrikant Talagiri's second book. The first book was Aryan Invasion and Indian Nationalism. Now, why I chose not to discuss that book, because you guys might ask a valid question, why क्यों नहीं discuss कर रहे हो वो book? Well, I'll tell you, because it has really, that book was a very political book. It was a political answer to the problem of Aryan invasion. It was written in 1993, so you have to put it in the context of the Ram Janmabhoomi time too. We remember, all of us remember Indian politics. We remember when the Ram Janmabhoomi has happened. Ram Janmabhoomi was there, and at that time, Sitaram Goyal, Ram Swaroop, they had just exploded. Voice of India had exploded at that time. And Rupa publications were there, or Aditya publications, whatever it is called now. I don't remember. So, these publishers were coming, Arun Shourie, and all those books were coming. And at that time, Aryan invasion was used. And so Talagiri also says, let's see the preface now of the book. What does Talagiri says? In our earlier book, we had taken up the subject of Aryan invasion theory in all its aspects and conclusively established that India was the original homeland of the Indo-European family of languages. However, the second book has become imperative for various reasons. One, And this is the main point, and that's why I'm reading it off the book. Why we are discussing this book? The literary evidence for our conclusion in our earlier book was based primarily on Puranic sources. According to many critics, the Puranas, whose extant versions are very much posterior to the extant Rigveda, are not valid sources for evidence pertaining to the Vedic period. The Rigveda is the only valid source for the period. I think not only this is the reason, anybody and everybody who's even read 1% of the Puranas knows that there are humongous interpolations in the Puranas. I mean, interpolations of magnanimous proportions. We cannot decipher with accuracy what Purana and what aspect of which Purana really is from the old days. It's just a fact of the life. So actually the Puranas are not really your authentic source. Luckily, what is now somebody might say, hang on, the same logic could be applied to the Rigveda. It can't. Why? Rigveda is a unique text. We are lucky that for at least we can comfortably say now 6,000 years. Yeah, 6,000 years. We've been having this culture where people literally recite the damn book on a daily basis. Some people without changing a full stop, punctuation mark, or a comma. The damn book is recited on a daily basis in different styles, different meters, different ways. But it has been done even today in India for 6,000 years in continuity. We have much more confidence in the content of the Rigveda than in comparison to the Puranas. We can always say that, if there is a clash, like I'll use this comparison, like in Quran. Let's just look at the Quran. So how does the Quranic logic work? So Quran has this concept of abrogation, right? So what does abrogation say? Let's say there are two Quranic verses that are, not fitting into each other. Let's say you take Medinan verse where your religion, the Meccan verse where the God tells the prophet through the agent, whatever agent kya hai uska, angel, agent ही होते हैं और क्या होते हैं. हाँ, so वो उसको कहते हैं कि your religion to you, my religion to me. Nice, peaceful verse of the Quran. Very good. God wants to be friendly and open-minded. But then you go to the Medinan verses. God just changes. God says, kill karo, this, do that. Now, this is a conundrum because it's the Quran. It's the word of God. How do we decide what is to be done? So the Islamic scholars, they had this concept of abrogation. So what they say is whichever is the later verse should be taken as the more authentic source because it is a later verse. And the Medinan verses are far later than the Meccan verses. So that's how they solve their conundrum. I think in the case of this problem of why should we take the Rigveda more authentically than the Puranas are, Rigveda is far more accurate in terms of even being practiced today. Puranas are not recited as much as the Rigvedas are even till date. There are schools that only recite the Rigveda. So in case, and secondly, there is a theological argument in the Hindu scriptures anyways. Whenever there is a conflict between a Shruti and any other scripture, you just go by the Shruti. So you have these two arguments, and that's why the Rigveda is the better source to analyze all of this. And anyways, what is the claim of the Aryan invasion theory or the Aryan migration theory? The claim is that people who came in, the steppe pastoralists who came in India, they got the Rigveda in. They did not get any other book in. They were Sanskrit speaking people who got the Rigveda, and they composed it. Most probably they composed it in India. That's their argument. But the verses were thought of and imagined of at some other place. We don't know what it is. Some say it is Anatolia, some say it's South Russia. We don't know which land it is. They seem to be having an argument amongst each other about that also. So we don't know about that. But they conceptualized those Rigvedic verses in those lands, came in their chariots above the Himalayas. By the way, I don't know how they got those chariots above Himalayas. That's a very interesting thing. Imagine using a shit ass chariot and going over the Himalayas. That would be a fun ride, by the way. And then they sat down over here and they composed the Rigveda in 400 years. That's what they say. 400 to 500 years. They composed the entire Rigveda. Now, the Indian side of the scholarship says the Rigveda was not composed in 400 to 500 years. the most reasonable and the most the conservative से conservative scholar भी बोलेगा ऋग्वेदा 2500 BC है. Conservative से conservative. I think Talagiri goes up to, the earliest verses, he goes up to 3000 BC. And then he takes it, say, 1000 to 1500 years. Like you start with the old books, and then you go into Mandal number 10, which is the new book. So he puts it around 1000 to 1500 years. You could say it could go up to more than that, but that's how long it took to, make the entire Rigveda cumulatively together. So this is where the difference is. Now, okay, do you have any questions at this point? Then I'll go into the book. Shriyari?
No.
All right, cool. So now let us look at this one. What does Talagiri say here? I think I've covered. We don't need to get into the biblical argument. So I'll just give you what he mentions in the preface is, if you guys read the preface, he uses a lot of biblical verses. I think you guys must have understood that pretty clearly. What he's trying to say is that why is this invasionist mindset coming into the scholarship of the Aryan invasion and the Aryan migration? So he uses the parallel of the Bible, which is actually a very smart argument. I was impressed with the argument even at 10 years ago when I had read it. I was like, it's an invasionist mindset. It's actually an Abrahamic mindset. The Abrahamic mindset actually is an invasionist mindset, because we need to go, how in the American, how was the American land conquered? It was always about new frontiers. It's always about new frontiers. So they basically thought, in Hindi bhasha, to speak in Hindi is, हमने सबको जाके लूटा, तो इन्होंने इनको भी लूटा होगा. So we went and conquered everyone. So I'm sure there were these people before. They must have conquered. So he's actually used good arguments. He used a lot of verses in the Bible. What verses has he used? Numbers 34.55-56. Then Deuteronomy 6:10 to 11. Deuteronomy 7:1 and 2. Deuteronomy 20:10-17, Deuteronomy 2:33-35, Deuteronomy 3:4 to 7. By the way, if you guys are interested, nothing to do with this subject, but I have actually summarized the entire Bible. I did it, I think 3 years ago. I had read 4 or 5 versions of the Bible, and then I summarized all the nice verses and I put them on a blog. It's on my website too. So if anyone, nothing to do with this discussion, if you guys love the Bible and you want to remember the Lord, the great Jesus Christ, I can share all the verses with you. All the good stuff is in the Old Testament, by the way. The New Testament is far more reasonable than the Old Testament. But oh my, the God of the Bible is an angry God. And by the way, another politically incorrect statement, is far more angry than the Quran God. The Quran God is not at all as angry as the biblical God. Okay, now let's get into. So I'm not going to mention how he says the Rigvedic references. That's pretty clear. I mean, if you guys, that's very simple to understand. He has said 1.2, that means Mandala 1, hymn 2. So while you're reading, so 1.2, comma 4 means Mandala 1, hymns 2 and 4. So basically the comma is and. That's what he's indicating. If there is a 2-4, that means from verses 2 up to 4. I mean, that's pretty clear. Anybody who reads it will understand it. One important thing we have to remember is that Talagiri mentions here, because this should be put on the record, is he says Mandala 8 contains 103 hymns. Of these, 11 hymns known as the Valakhilya hymns are known to be late additions into the Mandala. However, they are placed in the middle of the Mandala in any traditional text and in most Western translations, including that of Max Miller. But Griffith places them at the end of the Mandala, and he also changes the traditional numbering of the hymns that follow. We will be following the traditional numbering even while we quote Griffith's translation. So he's just given you an appendix. And I think that was the question of someone. I think Anita asked this question on Patreon. So this is what Anita had asked, that how do you know that these are later interpolations, right? So I had discussed this with Srikant Talagiri, that how do we find out X or Y or Z hymns are later interpolations. So later interpolations can be understood actually pretty well by using the first chapter that we are discussing today, which is the Anukramanis. The Anukramanis actually give you the basic idea about what verses are used when. So about these 11 verses, what they do is they look at the language, how the verse is structured and framed. So if the language is very archaic, they assume it is the old Rigveda. But even within the old Rigveda, if the language or the verse or the structure of the language sounds a lot like, the Mandala 9 or the Mandala 10, which are considered the new books of the Rigveda, then they assume that because the Sanskrit over here is very similar to the Sanskrit over there, this must be a later interpolation that they felt has to be added into the new book. And this is perfectly normal. It has happened in all religious books. If you guys did not know, just think about it. Actually, one good thing, the Bible is, it is at least chronologically arranged. The Bible is chronologically arranged. But seriously, the Rigveda is not chronologically arranged. I don't know, these people must be lazy or something. They did not even bother with the chronology. The Quran is not chronologically arranged. Even the Quran is not a chronological book. So you'll be surprised, like the first surah is not the first surah actually. Then the first surah is somewhere way down there. And if you read the Quran chronologically, it actually shows the change of mindset of the Prophet Muhammad very nicely. It's actually a very interesting book if read chronologically. So that's the answer to you, Anita. It's a very simple thing. They look at the structure of the verse itself. I mean, I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, so I can only go by the reasoning provided by the linguistic scholars as to why they considered those 11 hymns. And these are not the only 11 hymns. There are actually many other hymns that are also considered interpolations. As we will go on reading the book, we'll always find, again and again, Talagiri mentioning this, that, okay, this verse is an old verse and XYZ. One more thing I wanted to mention about this book is this book is purely an internal analysis of the Rigveda. This is an internal analysis. He has just looked at the Rigveda as a text and analyzed it inside. When we read the next book, which will be the Rigveda and the Avesta, that is completely different than this book. So remember whatever you have understood in this book, because he will use a lot of references from this book in his next book, which we will discuss too. So in his next book, he will be comparing the Rigveda with another old text, which is the Avesta of the Zoroastrians. That is also a very interesting book. Okay, now let us move forward. So chapter 1 is the Anukramanis. So I'm just going to read what he says in the beginning. The Anukramanis, or indices of the Rigveda, provide us with the most basic information about each of the 1028 hymns of the Rigveda. A, the rishi or composer of each hymn or verse. B, the devata or deity of each hymn or verse. And the chanda or the meter of each hymn or verse. For the purpose of our historical analysis of the Rigveda, we will be concerned only with the index, which deals with the most undeniably historical aspect of the Rigveda, the index of the rishis, which provides us with the details about the living and breathing historical personalities who compose the hymns. I'll tell you why I read this paragraph. Because, I don't know, you guys follow me on Twitter, all of you? You do? Okay. So, if you guys remember, a few days ago, I had mentioned this tweet that, yeah, how come this Aryan invasion is such a weird thing? These people, right, these steppe people, they came to India. They got the Rigveda to India. They wrote a whole bloody text in 400 years. The whole text talks about everything in India, flora, fauna, geography, even petty fights are all Indian fights. I mean, you just think about it. Like, let's say, many of us, I mean, I moved outside India, right? But I am sure, and even if it is 400 years, I mean, 400 years is no time, man. We remember Buddha. We remember Buddha. And these buggers, they completely forgot everything. सब कुछ भूल गए, कुछ याद नहीं है. And the entire text itself is about, those Purus, they have a problem with the Anus. Acha, who are the Anus? Oh, Bajwali tribe. There's a tribe nearby. Who are the Ikshwakus? Oh, the tribe down there. Oh, the tribe down north. I mean, what kind of a book is this? If the book is gotten by someone from outside, it has to be a pretty bad job. They really suck at it then. Imagine what kind of an invasion is this? The complete language comes, a complete culture comes, and does not talk about where that culture originated. Not at all. Not a single word. So, yeah, Brushal.
I just had a comment. in North America, like you were saying, how definitely there was what I would have described as an invasion. The native population was quite decimated and is barely hanging on by a thread to survive. um, Even all the names of the cities here are references to their homeland, right? So, we have Waterloo and York, etc., etc. The language, there's a more clear distinction. Even their cultural practices and everything, you can have a direct link to where it is. So you can't look at the, for example, Native American culture and find any of that from European, really, which is what it is, Anglo French kind of culture that's here. So just wanted to make that comment.
It's an excellent point, and I'll give you the answer because Talagiri deals with this exact thing in the book itself. So I'll give you a fascinating story about how invasions are. Let's assume the Americans came there. We all know that, right? But cutting across the world, wherever this Indo-European DNA has traveled, R1A1 has traveled. One thing they could not change, even in North America, by the way, the river names. Think about it. Is Mississippi Anglo America anglicized name or an Indian name? I can give you a lot of names.
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. I can give you. There is a list of names in this book. So that's actually a very smart question, Rushal. When you go ahead and read the book, you'll get the answer to the question itself in the book. Because even if you look around in Europe, you'll find a lot of river names that are of the time before the Indo-Aryans are there. They are not Indo-Aryan names. They are completely different names of different language families. Even when they have convincingly established their culture over there, they could not get rid of many names of the rivers. Guess what, Rushal? You're in India. Look at all the river names mentioned in the Rigveda. After the Rigveda, not even a single name of a river mentioned in the Rigveda is non-Indo-Aryan. All the names of the rivers are here. So to basically mention your point, the thing is that the reason there are no ancient river names left over here is simply because the language originated here. Because the language originated in this land, they named every single river on the basis of Indo-Aryan names. And when they went out, any invasion cannot remove the remnants of the past completely. They just cannot do that. Just look at the history of the world and you'll find, look at Egypt. Could they remove the pyramids? Are the pyramids a part of their Islamic past? Could they remove it? They could not remove the Islamic past. The Islam could not remove all of them. Leave alone that. Let's look at our next door neighbors, Pakistan, right? Pakistan is an Islamic republic. We all agree about that, right? There is no debate on Pakistan being an Islamic republic. But look at the habits of the Pakistani people. Have you seen their habits? They have these weird things like nazar lag jana. You know what I'm talking about, right? Nazar. We have this thing of nazar in our culture. Do you think that's an Islamic thing? Can you show me one authentic Islamic source? I'm not saying whether the nazar as concept is good or bad. I could care less about that. What I'm trying to say is that even when an invasion happens, you just cannot remove the connections of your culture. Here, what they've done is that the entire culture has literally wiped out. The Rigveda does not have a single trace of the native culture because they say that the entire culture of the Rigveda is an outside culture. But when you read the Rigveda, the flora, fauna, river names, everything, even the
Animal.
even the bloody animals, every bloody animal, everything is native to this land.
And
They,
especially horse, ashwa. That
yeah,
is a Indian word, I mean, Sanskrit word.
yeah. So this is the problem that the invasion, nowhere in the world, no invasion has been able to successfully change all the river names other than India. It's never happened anywhere in the world. But look at all the, just think about the seven rivers. You remember the names, right? I'm sure you must have heard Saraswati and all the other rivers. Byas, in Punjab area, you have that Byas river.
Vipas, Shatudri.
Yeah, Chutudri, that was another river. These are all Indo-Aryan names, Vrushal. These are not, they, imagine they're not even Dravidian names actually. These are all Indo-Aryan. all from the Indo-Aryan language family. But actually, that's a very good point you've raised. Good, because you stay in that part of the world, so you must have thought. But even the Europeans could not completely destroy the Indian American identity. It's very much there. Come on, man. I'm sure you watch ball, right? Baseball, basketball. You have ball. You have teams, right? What's that Detroit one? Because I used to still live in Toronto, so I remember the Detroit team. They had this whole brouhaha about their Native American name too,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, they have all kinds of examples where they even Cleveland Indians, right? They just call them Indians,
Yeah.
which it's not the Cleveland British or the Cleveland Francos. It's the Cleveland Indians. So yeah, no, there's lots of examples.
Yeah, so that's the thing. But if you look at it from an Indian point of view, either the Aryans did a damn good job, and just think about it. Even if you look at the evidence, what is the percentage of the step DNA? We have seen it's not more than 14% in any case anywhere in the population spread of India. Correct me if I'm wrong. Am I wrong, Devan? It's not more than
Uh,
14%,
it
right?
depends. I mean, in the northwestern part, it's not more than 15%. But
Yeah.
surprisingly, towards the east, like Manipuris, Bengalis, Nepalis, they have over 50%. So which actually kind of eventually it will prove that R1 is from these Gangetic plains.
So this must be so inconvenient for the left in India that the one people they love the most who keep talking.
But
This must be
they
such an
they
inconvenient.
don't have as much R1. It's the Bengalis, Manipuris, and Nepalis. They have more R1. Yeah.
So from what I know is that another interesting video you guys could watch is actually it's in Hindi. That's the problem. It's not in English. I don't know if everybody can read that. This guy Gyanendra Dubey or
Sure.
Chaube, he has done a good summary recently in a talk, and Neeraj Rai had recently tweeted it too. Just go on Neeraj Rai's Twitter handle and check it out. That's a very good, explanation of the R1A1 haplogroup. So you guys will enjoy that. Just if anybody wants it, they can contact me later on, and I'll send them the link too. But it's just follow Neeraj Rai, and you'll see that. Anyways, now let's go forward. So let me now. Okay. So what does Talagiri say here now on page 4? The Anukramanis give us details regarding these hymns which are so basic and indispensable that it is inconceivable that any serious scholar would consider it possible to analyze the hymns without taking the Anukramanis as the very basis for his analysis. But ironically, not only are the Anukramanis generally ignored by the scholars, but this ignorance of and indifference to the details contained in the Anukramanis is even flaunted by them. Consider the following statements by eminent scholars who considered themselves qualified to make pronouncements on Rigvedic history. B.K. Ghosh. The first mandala falls naturally into two parts. The first 50 hymns have the Kanvas as authors, like the eighth mandala. What is the actual fact? Mandala 1, verse 1 to 11 and 24 to 30. 18 hymns are by Vishwamitras. How do we know that? We just look at the Anukramanis. You just have to go back of the mandala. Every mandala at the backside, they have the indices. If you guys pick up a Rigveda, I mean, I have a Rigveda. It's hidden in the mountain of books that I have in my house. But yeah, it's pretty much all the Rigvedas, their Anukramanis are usually placed in the back as the indices. So they mention the main Rishi, the author, and what Devata they are talking about. And it's explained like that every single time. Every mandala, it's explained like that. Then what does he say? Book 1, 31 to 35 are by the Angirasas. Book 1, 12 to 23, 36 to 50, 27 hymns are the Kanvas. So what has he done here? He's basically showed that BK Ghosh, the so-called authority, if you guys don't know BK Ghosh, just Google him. He's like quoted by Marxists. So they get up in the morning, they say Om BK Ghoshaya Namaha, and when they sleep, they say Oh DD Koshambi Namaha. So they literally rely on BK Ghosh and DD Koshambi all their life. But what does he say? There are like 50 hymns by the Kanvas. And what are the hymns by the Kanvas? 27. This is a glaring error. And these are serious scholars, by the way. And then D.D. Koshambi, he says the principal Vedic god is Agni, the god of the fire. More hymns are dedicated to him than any other. Next is, in importance, comes the Indra. What is the actual fact? The ratio between the number of hymns and verses to the two gods by any count is Indra to Agni, 3:2. This is the complete opposite. What he claims is Agni is the god that is invoked the most, and after that Indra comes. What Talagiri did was, I mean, this is a seriously, I mean, you have to give it to the man. You know how boring this job must be? Sitting down, reading every single verse, counting Indra mentioned every single time, then counting Agni mentioned every single time, and then doing a analysis. This is how many times Agni is mentioned. This is how many times Indra is mentioned. And you don't get it. This is not a straw man where Talagiri is going and saying, you might say, big deal, it must be a typo. Uh-uh, it's not a typo. These are serious claims made by serious scholars. And these are authorities on the subject. And by the way, another trend you'll notice, all the so-called authorities on the Rigveda in India are all Marxists, by the way. All
And
of them.
know how to read Sanskrit. I
Yeah.
mean, it's okay if I don't know, but I am not going to write a book and claim stuff like these.
Yeah. So another interesting thing that Talagiri says is the flippant attitude of these scholars towards factual details when it comes to Rigvedic studies is underlined by the nature of Koshambi's error. He misinterprets the fact that hymns to Agni are generally placed before. This is very funny actually. Placed before hymns to Indra to mean that there are more hymns to Agni than to Indra. This is like second standard school child error. This is what they have done in this book. And that's why, see, we just have to discuss 5 pages in this literal chapter. Everything else is details, but understand the gravity of the error because your entire case is based by these people. Then let's go to Maurice Bloomfield. By the way, Talagiri is not anti Bloomfield. Talagiri admires Bloomfield. Maurice Bloomfield, in his invaluable work on Rigvedic repetitions, as in verse sections on phrases which occur more than once in Rigveda, claims that these repetitions prove the falsity or dubiousness of the information contained in the Anukramanis. Under the title Untrustworthiness of Anukramani Statements Shown by the Repetitions, Bloomfield remarks that the statements of the Sarvanukramani betray the dubiousness of their authority in no particular more than in relation to the repetitions. The Anukramani finds it in its heart to assign with unruffled insuance one and the same verse or two or more authors, or to ascribe it to two or more divinities according to it occurs in one book or another in connection to another. Now, what is Talagiri's argument? Talagiri says, I'm going to read it, then I'll talk about it. The repetitions do not disprove the authenticity of the Anukramanis. Why? A. The repetitions in the Rigveda are representative of a regular phenomenon in classical and liturgical literature throughout the world. And then he uses the example of Gilbert Murray, which basically in Greek literature, you have descriptive phrases are caught up ready-made from a store of such things, perpetual epithets, front halves of lines, back halves of lines, whole lines. So basically what he's saying is this is nothing new. In ancient literature, these kinds of repetitions and basically, copy in technical language, in today's lingo, we'll call it cut, copy, paste. It's pretty much right. It's called copying and pasting the same concept backwards, forwards. I use it here, I use it there. There's nothing new. It was used in the Greek literature too. So if this is false, then is the entire Greek pantheon also methodology also false? That's what Talagiri is trying to say. And another line that was very interesting, he says, quoting this, BK Ghosh notes, all this may be maintained mutatis mutandis also of Rigvedic poetry. Basically, the argument is if it is valid for the Greeks, it's valid for the Rigvedic poetry. But here's the catch. Again, this is page 5, the last line. I don't know which book you have. Maybe you guys must be reading the online version. I have the hard copy. So in the hard copy on page 5, the last line says, in the case of the Rigveda, it is significant that every single repetition pertains to a literary or liturgical phrase. In fact, the more literary or liturgical the reference, the more the likelihood of repetitions. The longest repetitions of 3 consecutive verses in the liturgical Apri Suktas of the Vishwamitras and the Vashishtas. Not a single repetition pertains to any historical reference. Even when the same historical reference is found in 4 different verses, the phrasing is different. Therefore, regardless of the number of verses or verse sections common to any 2 hymns ascribed in 2 different rishis, the hymns in questions have to be regarded as compositions of the 2 rishis to whom they are ascribed. That one rishi has borrowed from the composition of the other is no criteria in judging correctness of the Anukramani. You guys have any questions? Because I've read a lot. Srihari, do you have any question?
No, Kushal, not directly connected to this chapter. So it's okay. I can ask it right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
So why everyone is interested in only Rigveda? Because we have three more, right?
Why is everybody focusing on the Rigveda is because, to be very honest, that is the oldest book, and that is the only book that can be placed at the time of the so-called movement of the steppe people in India. B, that is the oldest book alive to actually known humans. Literally, this is the oldest book alive. It's actually quite amazing if you think about it. The oldest book known to mankind as we know now is Indian. It's actually quite cool. So that's why that's the only book that can be used as an authentic case for understanding Aryan invasion or Aryan migration. Second, as I mentioned, the theological argument. In the case of Hindu Dharma, anyways, only the Shrutis are the final authority, right? So if we are even having a discussion at a theological level, now I might be a Nastika, that's a separate issue. Leave me aside. But even if you are having a discussion with a theologian, that person will tell you that, hang on, you know, only Shruti matters. Now, the Upanishads, we all know Upanishads are far later on. I mean, just look at the Sanskrit of the Upanishad, right? The Upanishad can be placed at a much later time. So you are basically going, whether you like it or not, you have to analyze it using the Rigveda because that's the only book that places itself linguistically, archaeologically, and theologically at that particular time frame. Do you get it?
Yeah, yes, yes.
All right, let's move forward. What was the next argument that he makes? Because these are the two arguments. The next he says the composers of the Rigveda were members of 10 priestly families, and each family had its own Apri Sukta composed by a member of the family. In later times, during the performance of any sacrifice, at the point where an Apri Sukta was to be recited, the conducting rishi was required to recite the Apri Sukta of his own family. The Apri Sukta of the Vishwamitras was therefore undoubtedly composed by a Vishwamitra and that of the Vashishtas by a Vashishta. If these two hymns contain repetitions in common, it constitutes the ultimate proof that repetitions in common are no evidence of two hymns not having been composed by two different rishis. I think this is a pretty straightforward point. I don't think so there is anything you didn't understand in that. Second point that Talagiri says is there is no logical reason to doubt the authenticity of the authorship ascriptions in the Anukramanis, which are corroborated by. These are very important points. You have to pay attention to these points. A, the very existence of Anukramanis as a part and parcel of the Rigvedic text from the most ancient times. What does he mean? Listen, if these guys are not the authors, why did they waste so much time and energy in arranging the damn book, writing the names of the authors, creating such a huge index and writing it down? Come on. I mean, it's obvious. Do we question the authenticity or the authorship of the Bible? I mean, they say God is the author, let alone, but okay, what do you have to say, Devayan?
Sorry to be a dampener here. And I think this is one point you could possibly clarify from Talagiri, because what I read about Anukramanis is that it was written by Shayana, Shayana or Katyayana, I mean, in the 5th century BC. So it's probably time later than the Rig Veda was composed. So I'm really not sure about this. So I just hate to be the devil's advocate here.
Here's the thing. You're talking about the compilation, not the actual authorship of the verse. There are two different things. There could have been a compiler of the book and who would have arranged it at a later time. That could well happen. But what we're talking about here is the authorship of itself. Now, as we all know that the Rigveda was not written down in 10 years. The Rigveda was written down maybe in 1000 to 1500 period, right? So you must have had, maybe the Rigveda initially was just 2 books. So you go on adding those books.
Right.
So why is the compiler the author of the Rigveda? Then if the claim being made is the compiler is the author or actual author of the Rigveda, then the burden of proof lies on them or the other side, is my argument. You see what I'm trying to say?
Mhm.
Let's say, okay, Sayana is the compiler of the Rigveda, right? But that gives us no reason to doubt that who are the actual authors who are mentioned in the books itself.
Right.
Like, why would we doubt that Vashishta is the author of mandala number ABC or verse number ABC? Why would we doubt that? I mean, the natural corollary is the book says that this is the rishi is the author. Now, yes, obviously it is compiled later on in a non-chronological manner, which is extremely annoying, but it is. And if you look at most books at that time, they are they are arranged in a non-chronological manner. So there is a difference. We have to find a distinction between a compiler of a text and an author of a text. There are many compilers that are done. I mean, I'm sure there are compilations done all the time in the history. In science, you have a meta-analysis, right? I mean, look at this as a sort of a meta-analysis where I look at 100 studies, I study all those 100 studies, and then I give my meta-analysis. But the authors of the studies still remain, right? So
Right.
compilation could be looked at it from that point of view. I hope that answers.
And just a quick one there. Anyway, this is something anybody could go back and do, regardless of whether that was compiled in 5 BC. Like the Anukramanika, if I was to have, the rest of my life just to dedicate to this and was able to speak Sanskrit, I could probably come up with summarizing and all of this, and I should come up with something that's very close to that, barring the human mistakes I would make, right? So that was the other thing.
Yeah, another point we should add over here is that in the case of the Rigveda, it was a oral tradition. It was never a written tradition. The oral tradition starts with what? They always also pay, not only do they, give their ablutions or alms to the gods, they also mention the author every time. The author itself is mentioned in the recitation, right? I mean, have you guys ever heard a Rigvedic recitation in your life?
Once or twice. Yeah.
Okay, because
Yeah,
I belong to
yeah.
Arya Samaji family, so I'm so used to it. Because my mom, she may not understand a single word of the verse, but because I'm so used to listening to it all the time, right? In my house, because I was raised in an Arya Samaji household.
Right, right.
So it's very common, but just listen to the verses. The name of the Rishi, and obviously the god comes first. Every time the god is mentioned, the Deva. But they do mention the Rishis also, right? They are mentioned. So it's very simple. It was an oral translation that was continuing on. Those buggers did not bother. And then later on, as the script kept on developing, they just add, and eventually somebody must have compiled it. It's actually quite logical. It must. If it is not, then again, people who claim that Rigveda is not compiled by the people mentioned in the Anukramanis, the burden of proof is on them. For me, I see no reason to not believe that the book claiming this is the author is not the author of the book. That's my argument.
Good.
The second is the very division of the Rigveda into mandalas, many of which are family mandalas. Yeah, I'm sure you know, right? The family mandalas are literally priestly families. So it's like, every uh, book, like one mandala has one priestly family and it is entirely dedicated to them. At least in the old books, you have like a whole book, which is like the whole mandala is one priestly family. The uniformity of style in hymns ascribed to single rishis or families. Example, he has given Paruchepa. The common refrains occurring in the concluding verses of hymns ascribed to certain rishis or families. Example, he's given another. Kutsa. The common contexts in hymns ascribed to certain rishis or families. Example, the repeated references to Sudas in hymns by Vashishthas. Specific statements within the hymns where the composers refer to themselves by name. See, this is what I was trying to say.
Right. I missed that one.
When they keep on saying, obviously, yeah, you can call them narcissists, whatever, man. They keep calling themselves in the verses. They were like the rock. Just like the rock was, if you smell what the rock is cooking, they were talking about themselves in the verses itself. G, most important of all, the perfectly logical way in which an analysis of the historical references in the hymns, as we shall demonstrate in this book, produces a pattern of historical correspondences and interrelationships which fits in perfectly with the inscriptions in the Anukramanis. This is the clinching argument. Now I'll explain why. Now let me explain why this is clinching. As we will go further in this book, now if you are a Astika, it might maybe hurt your sensibilities. Talagiri can hurt your sensibilities because let me tell you very clearly, Talagiri does not look at the Rigveda as Aparashaya. Talagiri does not look at the Rigveda as some divine book. Talagiri looked at the Rigveda literally as a book written by people from ancient times. He picked it up and he's like, oh, so this guy's talking about this guy. He's talking about her. she's talking about him, X is talking about A, and if you put all of it in a non-divine perspective, everything makes sense. Oh, so it is just a book of the Purus. The Purus are talking about these other 9 tribes. That's why. See, that's why I wanted to read this point and explain it to you. Because as we go forward in the book, you'll see a lot of times Talagiri talking about these. Okay, this guy is talking about this. Look, this mentions about this. So this is the case. Now the rest of the chapter is basically, you know what, he's just shown we may now turn to the actual details given in the Anukramanis regarding the names of the composers of different hymns. So, he's basically, you have to give it to the man. He literally has sat down and written down all of them. We don't need to mention that on this discussion here, but he sat down basically and wrote the names of all the authors. And he gave you all the authors from start to end. So he also mentioned something. There are obviously corruptions in the Anukramanis in the form of ascriptions to fictitious composers. It's written in his chapter. This is particularly in the case of Mandala 10, where a large number of hymns are ascribed to composers whose names or patronyms, epithets, or both are fictitious. However, in the first 8 mandalas, except in the case of one single hymn, 8.47, it is very easy to identify the actual composer, by which we mean the rishi who actually composed the hymn or his eponymous ancestor to whose the name of the hymn is to be credited as per the system followed in the particular mandala of a hymn ascribed to a fictitious composer. Hence, in our listing of the composers of the first 8 mandalas, we have replaced the fictitious names in the Anukramanis with the names of the actual composers whose identity is clear from those same Anukramanis. In all these cases, the actual composer is the rishi of the hymn or the rishi of the mandala. And then he goes on and mentions those hymns. This pretty much covers the chapter. Now, if you guys have any other questions, go for it.
I was just curious on this. Any of you guys are Sanskrit? Like, how much? What background do you come with to this? The people on this, other than Kushalo, or is this, for me personally, this is my first exposure to this topic, really. So there's a lot of kind of growing, kind of the learning that I'm from the terminology. What I appreciated with the style was he's very economical. I think you made a comment earlier on Pushal that says he was very biting or something, but I think it's just because he's trying to get to the point with the least number of words and just cut the kind of all the fluff and extraneous kind of thing. So he's very economical. I like that, and quite the tables and everything really help make the point quite easy, but the terminology I'm still kind of catching up with. So I just wanted to kind of get an idea for who are the other participants, and do you come with any special knowledge or anything like that?
No, not really. But I have been, following this topic since I would say about a year and a half. So just reading stuff and mostly watching videos on YouTube. And I think that's gonna help you if you start with those 3 or 4 sessions by Shrikant Talagiri, that India talks or something. That's really helpful, I think.
Yeah. Me neither. I have very little knowledge on Sanskrit also. So many of these things are very new. So I follow YouTube and people like Shawl and people like Srikant Talagiri to get more ideas. So it's all pretty new, especially terminologies.
All right, let me take this up. Vishal, this is very important. You have to understand. You don't need to be a Sanskrit scholar to understand the Rigveda. First of all, this is the biggest problem I have with Astikas when I talk to them if I am debating Hinduism internally. This is what I call, they'll always find, you don't know Sanskrit, so how can you know this? This is the no true translation fallacy. Every religious person falls into this no true translation fallacy. You discuss the Bible with a biblical guy, oh no, you don't know Aramaic, or you don't know Hebrew, or you don't know Latin, or you don't know Greek. I'm like, come on, give me a break. Do you read Latin or Greek? Then why do you follow the English translation when you do it? So that's not let us get that aside. You don't need to be a Rigvedic expert. Look, I was obsessed with this subject. Leave me aside. I did not trust Talagiri. I read his sources. I did not trust Talagiri. I read the Rigveda. Why did I do all of this? I believed in the Aryan invasion and migration myself. I'm very open about it. I was like, there was the ad hominem that he's a bank clerk. So maybe somewhere even I was falling for the ad hominem. So I was like, maybe, this guy just made a claim. Let me check his sources. I actually went and checked his sources. I was like, nahi yaar, ye to sach bol raha hai. This guy is speaking the truth. His sources are accurate. Okay, then let me see what does the Rigveda say. So I started randomly reading the Rigveda. And then I was like, okay, man actually has a very interesting case. The only thing, if you ask me, that can falter his case is the day the Indus Valley script is deciphered, and that script narrates a completely, totally, weird story. As of now, let me tell you, nobody knows what the Indus Valley script says. Anybody who makes any argument on the basis of the Indus Valley script, whether it's pro-Aryan invasion, anti-Aryan invasion, is talking out of their ass. I am being categorically honest with you. Any and every discussion about the Indus Valley script is bollocks. We don't know. S.R. Rao has his own thing. Then you have the Proto-Dravidian argument. What was that, Mahadevan or someone who has the Proto-Dravidian argument. And there are so many arguments. If you guys are interested in a good summary of that, I can share a very nice blog. I mean, you'll go to sleep every 5 minutes when you read it, written by Conrad Ernst. He's actually summarized the entire. He's the expert, by the way. Talagiri is not the expert in that department, and even Talagiri will admit that. Talagiri, what he did was he read the Rigveda, read it verse by verse, chapter by chapter, just minutely observed it, and he organized it. And when he organized it as per the claims made by the Western Indologists, he said, "Hang on, it's not west to east; it is actually east to west." And that's what he does in this book. Talagiri, I mean, you remember the preface, right? Talagiri himself claims, "I'm no scholar of the Rigveda." I mean, if you remember in the start itself, where I think it does say here, or maybe it was in the previous book or somewhere, he does say that I'm not a scholar of the Rigveda. He does say that. But it doesn't matter if you're a scholar of the Rigveda. Do you think that Witzel can, speak amazing Sanskrit? No. He just keeps looking at the dictionary. Okay, this is what this verse means. Witzel can't speak it. You think Sheldon Pollock speaks Sanskrit? No. They don't speak Sanskrit. They understand it because they use linguistic principles to understand it. But that doesn't mean they can speak Sanskrit at all. In fact, the only guy who can challenge them in the speaking contest is this guy, I forget his name, who's written that book, Nityananda Misra. He's someone who's a living, breathing embodiment of the Sanskrit language itself. He thinks in Sanskrit, speaks Sanskrit, but you don't understand the fundamental of the Aryan migration. This is not a religious argument. This is an argument about a flow of a language and a culture from point A to point B. We are disputing that. And what we are doing is, what Talagiri is doing here is, Talagiri is looking at the arguments made by them in the book itself, by their material, and he's collating it and saying, but your arguments don't say that. And the basic thing that they say, that you cannot ascribe the authorship of the Vedas to what the Vedas say, is downright ridiculous. Then is anything that has been ascribed to Buddha, they are not Buddha's Mahavakyas? Are we going to say that then? Then whatever was mentioned as Bhagwan Mahavir's sayings, then we cannot, he didn't write it down, right? I mean, did Mahavir write them down? No. Did Buddha write them down? No. Krishna didn't write them down. Why is Krishna?
Alexander didn't write it. No, we can't even believe Alexander then.
Yeah. Why is the same logic applicable to the Anukramanis? Is my question. This chapter was only dealing with the authorship of the Vedas. These guys have rejected this because to fit their narrative, they have to prove that the Vedas are not written by these people. The Vedas were written by someone else. This is just rubbish created by them over a period of time because they had to keep it. That's the point. So if that is the logic, then, God is not the author of the Quran and the Bible too. Can't prove it. I mean, if you are going by actual proof, then, you have to bring the person here. So that's the thing. Now, what we'll do next time is, if you guys want, we can cover chapter 2 and 3, or you want to go chapter by chapter. Tell me.
To me, the reading went fairly quickly. It's
Mm.
more the discussions if you think you want to do a 2 hour session, because I haven't obviously read them, so I don't know what's coming up. But since you have, you'll have a better idea. But this probably took a good 40 minutes,
So we'll have to
35.
go chapter by chapter if you ask me, because chapter 2 is short, but chapter 3 is the chronology of the Rigveda, and I think we have to discuss the chronology of the Rigveda separately. That is the meat of the argument, the chronology of the Rigveda, because you confused. Because when we discuss the chronology of the Rigveda, you'll be like, hang on, why is 6 and 5 the oldest and not the 5th and the 6th? And I'll have to sit down and give you answers for that, because number 1 is not the oldest. It is not. Don't ask me why. I don't know. Blame the damn people who made it like that. They did a bad job. But it is what it is. 6 and 5, the family books, they are the oldest books. And he has explained it. What is the logic behind placing them as the oldest books? It's not his claim. It is a claim of the Indologist, by the way. He's just collating their claim and putting it on the table. So let's do this. Next time, what we'll do is we'll discuss chapter 2. We'll try to wrap it up in 45 minutes, because now you guys have a hang of what I'm going to talk about. So we don't need to, spend a lot of time. We'll wrap it up fast in 45 minutes. And then the next time we can go with chapter 3. If we find a smaller chapter after that, let me see.
Nah, I think the chapters just get bigger. I mean, the
Yeah, they
content
keep getting bigger. They keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's the problem. But I know we can do 2 chapters, because look, a lot of times what happens with Talagiri and his books, right? It is a lot of pages are just, oh, chapter number 1, this, chapter number 2, this. He keeps mentioning a lot of verses. But let's go chapter by chapter, because that way you guys can digest a lot of what he's saying also. Because trust me, I have read this book. Reread this book after 10 years, by the way. I read this book 10 years ago. In 2009, I picked this book up. This book was released in 2000. So I am still, because I've met Talagiri so many times, I'm used to listening to him so many times. So I kind of remember his arguments most of the time. So let's keep it at that. We'll do this next time. We'll decide the time and everything as and when it goes. We'll not keep a fixed time. We'll try to target the same time, 6:30, or it doesn't have to be a Sunday too. It could be any other day too, because even I have to look at my schedule and stuff like that. But we'll go on doing chapter by chapter. So anything else, guys?
No question. No.
Appreciate you kicking this off.
Yes, yes. Me too. Question. Good start. Good start.
All right. Okay, then. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. So all of you patrons who have not watched this and maybe are going to join the next session, please, I'll request you watch this session entirely, so that the next time if you guys join us for the discussion, it will make our life easier. Till then, namaste. Take care. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Namaste. Thank you.
Right. Bye.